without any justification. My friends, we need to know better than to believe in what individuals like those say. There has been another individual who joined forces with Red Capoe. I believe he's one of the pigpen denizens over there. One of our famous pigpen over here on the side. And he has actually threatened one of us that he was going to attack him. Now this, my friends, this is our opposition. They come to us, they scream, they shout, they lose their mind, and they don't say anything at all. They don't say a single point. But we have a point. We have a very important point to give for the whole world. Is that the whole world should move forward for a better tomorrow. And the main obstacle for this better tomorrow for the whole world is Russia. That is the main obstacle that this planet has to overcome. Because Russia does not want the future. Russia wants the past. That is the only thing that they've always claimed to want. They want to supposedly rebuild the Russian Empire. They want to supposedly rebuild the Soviet Union. Although no other people besides Russia wanted to be part of the Soviet Union. In fact, even many parts of modern-day Russia did not want to be part of Russia or of the Soviet Union. How were they treated, you might ask, by the Russians? They were killed, they were exterminated, they were oppressed many, many times in the past. Look at the two Chechen wars. Look at the Circassian genocide perpetrated by the Russian Empire long ago. One of the most important genocides, completely forgotten by most people. We have had a representative of the Circassian community come here once and thanking us for what we are doing and thanking us for bringing more awareness to the massive amounts of exterminations and human rights violations that the Russians have been guilty of. Not only now, not only in this war, many times in the past. Why should the world close its eyes to all of the Russian atrocities of the past? Why should the world appease Russia when they are clearly in the wrong? Why should we still try to play along with them and to give them what they want, when what they want is death, extermination, and theft? To destroy Ukraine, to destroy all of the countries around Russia. That is what Russia is hell-bound on doing. And we will stop it, my friends. And we are stopping it right now. Russia is reeling from the sanctions and from the terrible things that they've done in the battlefield. Because they have not only done terrible things to Ukraine, they have also suffered terrible things because of their own incompetence, because of their own stupidity, because of the stupidity of their generals, of their captains, and of the top brass of their command and control structure. The sheer stupidity of the Russian terrorist regime is mind-boggling. And it's really strange that there are still some people that would claim that it's all going to plan. It's all going according to plan. The 3-day special military operation is going on into its second year now. Now, how does that work, my friends? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. How does that work? It doesn't. And we need to know it. Because as we all well know, Russia will lose. But only if we stand together and only if we unite to help Ukraine win. All together, we will win.
All together, we will win.
All together, we will win.
All together, we will win.
All together, we will win.
All together, we will win.
Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Stop Russia, stop the war.
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 Stop Russia, stop the war. Thank you very much.
Stop Russia, stop the war.
And that is the only way for us to stop this war. Because Ukraine did not want war. Ukraine was demilitarizing. Ukraine gave up the third biggest nuclear demilitarization, the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world, in the biggest nuclear demilitarization in human history. Mind you, No such demilitarization has ever happened before or after. Ukraine could be said to be the country that has sacrificed the most to achieve world peace. And how is it that the world will reward Ukraine for such an action? By allowing Russia to do what they please? Or by stopping the Russian onslaught now that they are weak, now that they cannot advance further than Ukraine? The Eastern European countries know very well that if Ukraine falls, they will be next. That is a certainty. That is not a what if question. That is a when question. But only if Ukraine falls. And that is why they're making everything they do is so that Ukraine does not fall. Everything they do is so that Ukraine wins. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, all of them have shown great support towards the Ukrainian cause. And many other countries included around the whole world have supported Ukraine because they know that what Russia is doing is terrible. And it's a terrible precedent for the whole world. If Ukraine, the country that has given up the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world, is allowed to be invaded and exterminated by a nuclear power right now, then what will happen in the future, my friends? What will happen when other countries that have nuclear weapons decide that all of a sudden they will be blameless, no matter what they do to the countries that do not possess nuclear weapons? What if they come to that conclusion? We will have endless wars all over the globe. Wars of extermination and of expansion, where the countries with nuclear weapons will abuse every other country that does not possess those weapons of mass destruction. That is why the Ukrainian cause is so important for the whole world, not just for Ukraine, because to help Ukraine means to prevent further wars in the future. That is what it's all about. A while ago, I have had a discussion with one of our lovely protesters here. I believe Ksenia is still here. Ksenia is right here. Thank you for coming today, Ksenia. A while ago, we've had a discussion about what it means. What is the meaning? What is the meaning of Ruski Mir, of the Russian world, or Russian peace, as it can be sometimes translated? And we came to the conclusion that there are two meanings for that definition. The first of them is the Russian world, the Russian speaker world, the Russian culture world, and all of that. Or at least what Russia claims to be their sphere of influence. And it is not always as such, because the English-speaking world in the world is huge. However, they're not all controlled by the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, the British Empire, no longer exists. And yet the Russians are still trying to cling to what could possibly be a new Russian Empire. A futile claim, completely futile attempt to reconstruct that genocidal empire. And yet they want to do so. That is one of the meanings, the Russian world. But what about the second one, the Russian peace? This term goes all the way back to ancient Rome, to the term of Pax Romana. When the Roman Empire had its lands in a state of almost complete peace, and no large-scale wars were fought. It was a good time for the Roman Empire, but the difference is, the Roman Empire had some benefits and had some flaws. It did great things, and it did terrible things. As for the Russian Empire, everything they've done was terrible. There was almost no benefit for anybody to be part of the Russian Empire. Poverty, destruction, extermination, violation. Those were the results for every single subservient people in the Russian Empire. They were unable to do anything about it, and their quality of life never improved. In fact, it only got worse. The Russian Empire was seen as a backwater by the rest of the European state, and for good reason. The Russian people had the worst quality of life by far, comparing them, if we compare them to any other people in Europe. And they have decided, or at least their government has decided, to keep it as such, to keep the peasants poor and to keep the leaders rich. That is how Russia has always been ruled. Not just now, but always, in the past, present, and potential future, unless they are stopped. And the worst part of this whole idea of the rich Russian elites getting richer and the poor Russian peasants getting poorer is that they want to expand such ideas to the rest of the world. It is not an isolationist empire. It is an expansionist empire. They're trying to take over new lands, enslave new people, impoverish new cultures and new nations. The whole world would be their slave if the Russians could achieve it. If Putin could walk into Washington DC tomorrow and say, make me the king of the world or I will nuke everybody else, he would have done so. But of course, he knows better than that. Because although he is one of the lowest individuals who has ever lived in human history, he is no fool. He knows what he's doing, and he simply doesn't care. He's a psychopath. That is what Putin is. Not a madman, not an idiot, a psychopath. We cannot negotiate with psychopaths in good faith, because they will always betray their word no matter what they promise. And he has always betrayed his word. He has never once failed to betray his promises. He has never once failed to betray his words and the agreements that he has been bound to by the international community. How can we ever negotiate with someone who keeps breaking the agreements, who keeps lying? We all know the saying very well. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times. And in this case, your name is Russia.
And nothing's changed when you think about it being a backwater. This is a country with pretensions of being a power, yet they do not even benefit their own. I'm going to get Pablo to read something out here, a statistic I read this morning. And Pablo, if you read from just this one sentence at the same time.
At the same time, a fifth of Russians, 28 million, have no access to indoor toilets or running water. Mind you, this is why they've been stealing all of those toilets. If anybody doesn't know about this, it's been a recurring joke in the international stage. The Russian military is stealing toilets from Ukraine. That is how poor the lowest of Russians are. That is how poor they want to make Ukraine and the rest of the world if they're able to do so. They don't care about equality. They don't care about a better future, a better tomorrow. They only care about the immediate and perpetual enrichment of their elites. That is the only thing that the Russian pseudo-empire has ever cared for. My friends, we need to know better than that. But coming back to the idea of the Pax Romana, it has been, you could almost say that it has been a plagiarism of the Roman idea of Roman peace. The Russians, indeed, have claimed in the past to be the third Rome. And this is not a joke. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is something the Russians and the Russian scholars and historians freely speak about. They speak about Moscow as being the third Rome, as being the head of the Roman Empire. Now, how does that work, my friends? What is the similarity between the great Roman Empire that has implemented law, that has implemented infrastructure, that has created the basis of Western civilization, and Russia? The destruction and degradation of that very basis, the desertification of civilization, the reverse industrialization that Russia is doing right now, because indeed Russia is cannibalizing its own economy. Their government is cannibalizing their own people, and they're trying their best to brainwash them with propaganda. That is the real tragedy of modern day Russia, my friends. That is what Ukraine is resisting and what Ukraine is fighting against. That is what we should all stand against. Because if anybody wants to live in a better world, they need to start learning about what's going on the opposite side of the planet. Although some people don't even care what happens in their own neighborhood, like we've seen with individuals such as Orban, who's obviously a Russian shill and has his pockets full of Muscovite money. But, alas, The swinging of the wings of a butterfly can cause a hurricane on the other side of the planet. That is an old saying, an ancient saying, and it holds very true nowadays. Because whatever happens on one side of the planet could have massive consequences on the other one. Russia is weaponizing their food supply. Russia is weaponizing grain, it's weaponizing oil, it's weaponizing gas, it's weaponizing their own language, it's weaponizing their own people. Their own ethnicity is being weaponized right now. Prigozhin himself, the leader, one of the leaders at least of Wagner Group, the spokesperson of the Wagner Group, because the founder, as we all well know, is not just Prigozhin, but also Dmitry Utkin, a famous neo-Nazi that is now one of the leaders of one of the most powerful military groups that supports Russia in this war. That is the leader of one of the groups that is attempting neo-colonialism in Africa and in the Middle East. By destabilizing Sudan, by destabilizing Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger lately. We need to remember about what's going on in the rest of the world, my friends. Russia is not staying quiet in their corner. Russia is expanding, Russia is attacking, Russia is destabilizing, Russia is subverting. They're doing all of this to make life absolutely unbearable for the rest of the world. Because they know that the West is now unused to war. The West is unused to hardship. If the quality of life lowers, then people might start questioning what's going on. That is what the Russians are counting on. They are trying to put sticks in the wheels of the West so that the opinion of the people might change. But the people must know better. The people must be informed about what really is going on in Ukraine and that Russia is running on fumes. If the Ukrainian military gets all the armaments they need to beat the Russian military decisively on the battlefield, this war will be over. This war could have been ended long ago. This war could have been done for, to never be repeated ever again. However, unfortunately, the voices of appeasement have been triumphing in the past, but they must never triumph again. Because to appease a dictator, to appease a madman, a psychopath, somebody who genocides and who exterminates, is to allow that extermination made. It is to be a part of that extermination, because we need to oppose such individuals. Sometimes Russia will appeal to the emotions of the world to try to claim that they are the victim in the end, somehow. Although they started this war, they escalated this war, and the only way to stop this war is if they stop. But alas, somehow they can still act like the victim in this situation, because they don't care about their lives. Their idea of the truth is that if you keep slinging mud into the wall, some of it is bound to stick. If you keep throwing lies at the West and at the rest of the world, some of those lies will stick inevitably. Russia has nothing to lose in terms of its international reputation. They have a terrible reputation. Nobody trusts them now. Only pariah countries like Iran and North Korea still directly support Russia. Why is that? Because they've got nothing to lose either. They have an authoritarian government oppressing their own people, using their people as slave labor, and killing them whenever they disagree, whenever they rebel, whenever they try to achieve a better future. Is it really surprising that these are the countries that are supporting Russia right now? My friends, we must understand this situation, and we must speak to the whole world, because as obvious as this might sound, some people don't know it. As obvious as this may seem, some people are being brainwashed by the Russophile Muscovite propaganda that is going on all over the world right now. And propaganda is the one thing that the Russians are very good at making. Although they are getting desperate these days, but they are still succeeding to an extent with their spreading of the propaganda. The only thing it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And that is why we should do something. We should speak, and we should not remain silent about this terrible plight that befell the Ukrainian people at the hands of Russia, at the hands of Vladimir Putin, at the hands of this neo-colonial and neo-imperialistic idea of re-establishing the Soviet Union. That is the problem that we face right now, my friends. And that is the problem that we have to solve. And the only way to solve it is to help Ukraine win. Help Ukraine protect peace.
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 Fight the jets for Ukraine.
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 Air defense 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 for Ukraine.
My friends, the crimes of the Russians are not in the past. They are in the past, present, and potential future. Because even if Ukraine gets everything they need to stop the Russian terrorist state, there will still people who will die in the near future. This is not an
Roman,
immediate solution. We must
уже
understand
вакарас,
that.
неритас.
But what we must do is not delay and do whatever we can now, so that in the future the situation will become better, certainly.
Sorry, just a reminder, again, other things you can do is not buy certain products. Until I find out otherwise, do not buy any products from the food company Danone, and certainly do not buy any products from Unilever. They own a lot of brands, everything from Magnum ice cream, Viennetta ice cream, Persil, Dove soap. So look online, find out what Unilever makes, and do not buy from them until they get out of Russia. They must be avoided. So there's plenty of products which I'm not going to give them free advertising. Just look online for yourself what Unilever sells, and do not buy those products. And don't buy from Danone either. Thank you.
Thank you very much for reminding us, Tommy. This is a very important topic. We must not support the companies that still trade with Russia. We need to oppose Russian trade. We need to oppose Russia by any means we can. And this includes sanctioning their oligarchs, sanctioning their businesses, and sanctioning their sportsmen. Because indeed, although many voices have claimed disdain at the idea of sanctioning Russian sportsmen and sportswomen, it is very necessary. The Russian morale sits on their idea of superiority to the rest of the world. And these sportsmen and sportswomen have been directly supporting the Russian so-called special military operation, also known as their genocidal war in Ukraine. These individuals are not blameless. These individuals are not victims. These individuals are the perpetrators. And we need to understand this. We must not be fooled by crocodile tears and by this false weeping and appeal to emotions. Emotions are very important for all of us. We are human, but we need to have more than just emotions. We need to know the truth. We need to know the facts. We need to see the world as it is and not as we want to see it, so that perhaps in the future it is going to be better. It is going to become the world that we want to envision. There is a good comparison to make to modern day Russia. The comparison of a thief getting caught red-handed right as he was stealing, and the thief cries. You ask him, why are you crying now that you got caught? Why were you not crying when you succeeded at stealing, when you managed to get away? Where were your tears back then? The action was the same, only the consequence is different. That, my friends, is because the thief who gets caught red-handed and cries is not crying because he feels bad. He is crying because he got caught, because he wished that he got away with his crime. And that is exactly how Russia is behaving nowadays. They're claiming as if they have a right for Ukraine. They're claiming as if they can do whatever they please. That, my friends, is a lie. You need to understand it as such. Ukraine has the right to do what they will as a sovereign state. Russia has the right to do what they will in their own lands as a sovereign state. but not in the lands of others. Especially considering that the Russians have signed many treaties that promise that the Russians will not encroach on Ukrainian sovereignty, Ukrainian lands, and Ukrainian freedom. One of them, as we have mentioned before, is the Budapest Memorandum, the biggest nuclear demilitarization in human history, in which the Ukrainians gave up their nuclear arsenal, the back then third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. That was the sacrifice of Ukraine. There were other treaties, mind you. Let's not forget about the friendship treaty between Ukraine and Russia, signed slightly after the Budapest Memorandum, which re-ratified the same conditions of the Budapest Memorandum. But of course, when Russia invaded Ukraine without as much as declaring war against Ukraine, Putin did not speak about these treaties. He did not mention the sacrifices that Ukraine has committed to achieve world peace. He didn't care, and he didn't want to get the bad press about it, because Putin will only speak about the things that work in his favor. And nowadays, those things are almost non-existent. And that is why, more and more, he's completely making things up out of the blue. Like, for example, the now classic video where Putin is discussing with one of these so-called Russian historians and saying about an old map, an old, I believe, Victorian-era map, that there was no Ukraine there. Where is Ukraine? It didn't exist. When in reality, on the same map that he was pointing, there was very clearly written, Ukraine, country of Cossacks. Back then, Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire, unfortunately. But Ukraine had a different identity to Russia. Ukraine had always a different identity to Russia. And for Russia to say that Ukraine has originated from Russia is the same as the US saying that Great Britain has originated from America. It would be ridiculous. It would be nonsensical. It would be insane. And yet the Russians still do it. Because as we all well know, the Kievan Rus was the predecessor state of Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. And as the name implies, its capital and its seat of power, its heartland, was in Kyiv, in Ukraine. The Russians hate their history. That is why they choose to do revisionist history. And they claim to love this fake that they have made up to appease themselves and their own ego. They claim to love these lies because they have nothing else. The Russian elites know that if they tell their people the truth, their people will riot. But unfortunately, even the Russian people have been subverted by the propaganda for a very long time now. And it is also the blame of a lot of the Russian people what is going on in Ukraine. Putin is not without support. And that is one of the most terrifying things. That you can brainwash a whole nation into believing into completely nonsensical claims just by holding the means of communication. That is the Soviet Union's wet dream that Putin is trying to accomplish right now. But we need to know better. We need to speak, we need to act, and we need to make this change, my friends. Because the Ukrainians, yes, the Ukrainians, they will be the first ones to suffer with the Russian plight. But they will not be the last ones. And if Ukraine is priced enough to pay for some shills, Russophiles, and apologists, then what isn't? When is the real line when people are going to start caring about the mindless expansion and extermination of other nations perpetrated by the Russian terrorist state? Where is this line? Is it at the border of Ukraine? At the border of Belarus? At the border of the UK? Or perhaps at the border of the homes of the very apologists who say these terrible things? No, my friends. The borders of Russia are the borders of the Russian state. No more. Their influence does not go to Ukraine. Their influence does not go to Belarus or to Kazakhstan or to any other countries at their periphery or where they have their armies, like in Syria, in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Sudan. That is not Russia. That is not the Russian world. So why are the Russian troops there? Why are the Russian troops still in Moldova? The Soviet Union collapsed many years ago. Why is it that those troops are still there? Because people are choosing to remain silent and blind to the plight that is going on through Eastern Europe. And we must understand what's going on before we are able to stop it. Because if we don't learn with the mistakes of the past, we are truly doomed for the future. But I believe, and we all believe, that the world is waking up. The world is learning its lessons, not to trust the Russian terrorist state and to help Ukraine get an unequivocal victory and to finally claim its full and unquestionable independence against the Russian terrorist state. This khanate of Russia, this great kleptocracy, the country-sized criminal syndicate with its don living in bunkers and hiding from the public eye. That is the person who is our enemy. That is the state, the elites who are our enemy. Not just the enemies of Ukraine, but the enemies of the whole world. And if anybody questions this, look at what the Russian propaganda says. They loathe the West. They loathe the UK, the US, and the rest of all the European countries who might not give them absolute support. They loathe them. They keep talking about them as if they are the most terrible countries to live in the world. And yet, those are the countries that people migrate to the most. Not Russia, not North Korea, not Cuba, not Iran. How come these supposed great countries, as Russia claims, are so disliked by the people around them, are so scary for migrants to go towards? Because, my friends, people don't migrate to a country to be oppressed there. People flee from oppression. And that is why people flee from North Korea, people flee from Iran, people flee from Russia. We have seen it at the first attempt of a massive mobilization. 1 million young Russians have fled and scattered everywhere that they could go. Why did they leave? Their country is so great. It's the Ruski Mir, it's the Russian world, right? No, my friends, no. Those ideas are folly. Those ideas, thank you very much, are nonsense. We need to see through them and we need to tell the whole world what it is, what Putin is doing. That Putin did not invade Ukraine to save the Russian speakers or the ethnic Russians as he claimed. Even Prigozhin has called him out on that. Even Prigozhin has said that these supposed Nazis that were supposed to denazify in Ukraine never existed. He said they were fighting the Ukrainian military for more than a year and they were still looking for these Nazis. They still couldn't find them. My friends, this war was waged because Putin felt like he could get away with it. Because the Russian terrorist state felt like it could get away with it. And we must make sure that they never make that mistake ever again. Because the only thing preventing Russia from further aggression and potentially from nuclear war is the threat of immediate and inevitable retaliation from the West. If that threat did not exist, the Russians would have used nuclear weapons all over the place. The Russians would have attacked every country that they could possibly attack. It would have happened. But the Russians know that there will be retaliation, at least now. That is why we must always oppose the voices of appeasement, the voices of the apologists who side with Russia and who defend the supposed Ruski Mir, or Russian war, as what it really is. Slava Ukraini! Slava nacії! Україна! 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 Героям України тричі!
Слава, слава, слава!
And now we will have a short musical break.
Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава!
We gather here 3 times a week because we stand for peace in Ukraine. Ukraine never started any wars, and if you don't believe our word, the easiest way to support Ukraine is to learn world history. If you ask a Russian person about USSR, they will say it was amazing. If you ask anyone else, they will tell you that it was horrible. If you ask a Latvian, Lithuanian, Estonian, any nation who was under rule of USSR, they will tell you how terrible it was. And the same people who say to us now, we need to negotiate with them, yeah? I want to urge you to read an article, an essay that Vladimir Putin published in July 2021 on the history, on a historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians. There was no such thing as a unity between Russians and Ukrainians. There never will be, and there never will be any unity. If you watch what Russians are doing in Bucha, in Odessa, destroying grain, I give you a question. Imagine Russia having 30% less crops this year, yet they promised to give grain to African countries. Guess which grain they're gonna give them? They're gonna give what they stole in Ukraine. Guess what happened exactly 90 years ago? Holodomor. Guess what they did back then? They stole the grain from the most fertile land of Ukraine, and millions of people starved to death after they had their crops stolen. 90 years later, a man who loves to quote Stalin so much steals the grain from Ukraine. He's denazifying grain so it doesn't get to Africa. He's using food to blackmail Africa, so they lift the sanctions on trade, and he is trying to give Africa stolen grain from Ukraine. Can you imagine? The person who threatens Poland, that Western Poland, was gifted to them by Stalin. And we gather here because we felt it, we saw it, and we know what we saw.